Chapter 5. Montgomery huffed and then inhaled as he watched light slowly pour into the console with the sliding back of the sheath. He hated the feeling of being nearly upside down for so long, and his body was numb from the morning's battles. He slowly sucked in a stale, filtered breath and felt severely dissatisfied. The voice ordered him to exit the console. It took him a long time to heat it. He clapped his hands on the side of the machine to emerge and slowly lowered his body down to the floor. Willow Peters, her full name had been. She was far and away the most beautiful person he knew. His mind grew hazy, trying to drum up details of his past life. The torture he'd endured was like a wall of mist barricading those memories. Did he have a wife? Children? A part of him thought he did, and yet he couldn't summon their faces. No, it must have been his imagination, especially considering how another part of him was sure he'd never been married or had a serious girlfriend at all. How bad had the torture gotten to make him forget that? But Willow, she was clear and bright as day in his mind. The way she'd looked, the way she'd spoken, the way she'd moved, how her mind was indomitably clear and focused, like a clean city street beside a pretty park square. Clearer than anything in this waste that was his confinement. Consequently, she was also terrifying, utterly terrifying. The thought of her coming to know his world. Could it even be comprehended? The soul-warming joy of their growing affection would be met in equal measure by crushing devastation come the inevitable end, however far off it may have been. It was inescapable. He felt that he loved her, and that she loved him, not greatly yet, of course, as they had only just met. But there was something between them, something true and warm and blazing bright, new. And yet, even if it was love, she would not love him any more when she discovered who he was. Not only that he was a soul-caged android. Even if she somehow salvaged any perceived sincerity from him after that, if she tried to probe further into the truth of his life, she would learn that he wasn't European. He had killed Europeans. He was an enemy to them and a slave belonging to them. He couldn't be free. This endless iron sphere had no beginning and had no end. The light did not touch it. The food that pushed through the slot was flavorless and processed, lifeless. Montgomery had no memory of the last real thing he'd ever done. At this point, with the mist hanging in the back of his mind, how could he know that he had ever been real? "G09," came the voice. He lay on the floor and said nothing. "You are ready to discuss permanent usage of the Soulcage. You will adhere to this, will you not?" said the voice, as if he knew that Montgomery's answer was only a formality. But it wasn't. He could resist, as he had resisted before the torture came. But that would be pointless. "I'll be comatose," he said, almost feeling surprised by his own lack of a British accent. "I'll never be myself again. Fed through tubes, living from body to body like a jolt of electricity or a line of computer code pushing a machine forward. Yes, you will." He shut his eyes and sighed a long sigh, idly brushing his fingers across the metal texture of the floor. He wondered if that was rust he smelled. "You will adhere to this. You know the alternative." A set of chords in the back of his head. Pain and suffering unimaginable, unending, eternal. Desires forever unfulfilled, raging and shameful, desperate and raw. He felt his fists tighten, his jaw clench, and his eyes spout seeds of tears. Why? Why are you doing this? The greater question is, why are you refusing, G09? All the others who were in your block with you at the start of this have graduated to constant Soulcage use. Yet you have resisted, nearly at the cost of your sanity. You are the anomaly. Why don't you accept your true role in society? My true role. You think you get to decide who I am? G09, you know the alternative. You know we can make you feel. Certainly its echoes reverberate through you even now. It's been 2 months, G09. 2 months of this. You've squandered your potential as long as our administrators will allow. Before too long, you will be returned to the torture chamber. The seeds of tears sprouted into gushing fountains. Don't put me on the battlefield, he squeaked. He pushed the words out like 50-pound barbells. Don't leave me in a junkyard with the dead things, the things that were never even alive. I want to live. Damn you, I want to live. You aren't alive, G09. You are soul-caged. You always will be. It is your debt to society. It is your lot in life. Cold words. Facts that could not be disputed, like a hot knife to the butter of his emotional pain. I could kill myself, he muttered, shaking his head. Willow, sky-blue eyes. Over and over in the Soulcage, I could kill myself until you'd have no choice but to let me, the real me, die. You think that we'd let such an asset go to waste? G09, you are far too valuable. I'm too valuable. You already know talk of resistance is futile. "It will not be all bad, Geo9," said the voice. It didn't matter to whom it belonged, whether that person was male or female, old or young, enemy or friend, malicious or professional. You imagine use of the soul cage as a hell, but really it would be far better to live soul-caged out there than languish in reality here. "No, it's not real," he said defiantly and yet weakly, as he slid backwards on his back, the floor gradually inclining until it became a wall. He opened his eyes and looked around, but he would only ever see the door entrapping him and the soul cage dominating everything. "It is more real than this," argued the voice. And he was right. Montgomery wept. He sat up and let the tears come, let the misery wash through him, soaking deep into his breast. "Let me be a human being," he demanded. "Don't send me into another damned piece of metal. I don't care how real you make it seem. It's not real." His ask wasn't entirely honest. Even if he were to be soul-caged as an ashtray, he still would think it worthwhile if he could just be near Willow again, just once. Even if it was ephemeral, doomed to end in sadness, it would at least happen. And yet he couldn't divulge that desire to them. If they knew how much seeing Willow again meant to him, they might snatch that privilege away as punishment whenever it became convenient. For all he knew, he would never get another chance to be with her again. The man he'd spoken to, who had sent him back, had said as much. He didn't know whether the company would decide to pay for another date or not. It was entirely up in the air, a corporate decision crowdsourced by Greenwell shareholders. A long and terrible silence from the intercom. Then, "Climb into the soul cage console, Geo9. What is this, he thought. No sense in asking. They wouldn't tell him. It could be an answer to his request, or it could be torture. How could he know? Perhaps it was a gamble worth taking. He sat up and climbed back into the console, touching the dirty remnants of oil on the handles from the many hands that had touched it over the years before him. He settled into the cockpit and made his body go limp. The light disappeared, and shortly his soul vanished away in a flash of needles and fire. Colorful lights and music blasted through the haze and smoke. With so many lights, it was a marvel that the place remained so dark. Montgomery turned about. He was an android, and yet far less realistically human-looking than most android bodies he'd been in. His central skeletal structure was exposed in many places, and the pieces of rubber or soft polyester making up his limbs were shaped like swooshes with many aesthetic gaps within them. People were everywhere, and relatively few of them fully clothed. This was some sort of nightclub. Men in golf club wear or fine suits strutted about with girls on each arm, girls all clad in slick revealing dresses and dolled up with enough makeup to paint a barn door. Various sticks of tobacco or other substances lay perched between the lips and teeth of nearly everybody around. Having no sense of smell was a blessing here. One of the passing ladies, if she could be called a lady, reached out with a glitzy smile at Montgomery, plucking something from near his hand. It was only then that he realized he was holding a tray with many tall, neon-colored drinks. His mind became arrayed with instructions of where to go. The layout of the club was set in his mind's eye. All the many people requesting new drinks called out to him with digital signals. Obeying his programmed compulsion, he moved forward to find and serve them. He walked with mechanical grace. Bodies, tables, and dancers were so tightly packed that he was sure the tray would have fallen without such guidance. Lights, people, and sounds of music and speaking all assaulted his limited senses, made his heart shrink. Overwhelm, sheer overwhelm. His eyes peeked to the left. Through the murky clouds of smoke, he beheld the unmistakable figures of numerous shadowed, gyrating females atop a stage, most of them nude or functionally nude. Laughing crowds surrounded the stage and gawked. Montgomery stopped beside the sleek table occupied by 4 burly, frightening men. Lips were severed, hair was bleached or dyed and cut, piercings popped out of places they shouldn't, and tattoos ran rampant. After experiencing a torrent of shock at their unruly appearances, he quickly set down drinks for each of them. They barely gave him a glance. Their attention was elsewhere. Another android, shaped almost exactly like Montgomery, walked past him, except this one was female. A word was displayed on a small screen just below her chest. Slav. "Western scum," spat one of the seated men, a crooked semi-smile on his face. Montgomery turned to meet his murderous eyes, confused. "How long you been here, Westy?" chuckled another. "You look like you ain't seen the sun in decades." The 4 of them laughed heartily and took turns taking long swigs of their drinks. Montgomery looked down his own chest and saw the word Westy on a small screen for all to see. "I'm a Westy scumbag," said Montgomery, except he didn't say it. His robotic body said it for him through a cheap set of speakers. The voice was timid and absurd-sounding. "I deserve to die. Please don't be too harsh when you beat me. I want to be in good condition for the next beating." Montgomery felt the ghost of his heart crackle with a shot of lightning. He couldn't control his mouth, and he could barely control the programmed urge to serve these people. What was this place? Flashing colors nauseated his mind. Silhouettes of people involved in all manner of scummy, villainous, and illegal behavior and debauchery assaulted his eyes, hundreds of them, all happy as could be. He turned to the stage again. 3 women danced there where he could see, visible between clouds of smoke. 2 of them were not actually women at all, but rather android women, exactly like the other Sura that had passed by. They danced on the stage beside metal poles, flanking the real flesh and blood girl. The android anatomy was exaggerated and vulgar. On their screens read the words Asian and Latina, respectively, along with a rotating cycle of many other fouler words. The men sitting just before the stage were shouting the most profoundly vulgar things at the androids. In response, Montgomery could hear the girls, or rather their programmed voice boxes, saying equally vulgar things, primarily requests for sexual favors and violence. He couldn't believe his eyes. "Oi, wanker Westy, don't look at them," raged the man closest to Montgomery. He stood up and grabbed the sheet of rubber plating that made up Montgomery's collarbone. He started to understand why he wasn't made out of very many hard materials. The brute's fist collided with his face. Montgomery absorbed the shock of it like a rag doll. The pain was not dulled in these bodies, he noted. He wanted to pull back and run away, even strike the man back, but his programming pushed him to remain still, to take it oh so submissively. He hated it, wanted to fight back, wished he had the power. One of the other men lifted up his chair and raised it high over his head. The first brute backed away just as the chair came down. A spectacle of alcoholic liquid and shards of glass rained down onto the floor alongside Montgomery's crumpled body. Pain jolted through him, and he tried to scream, but nothing came. "Hurt me good," his voice box said instead. "I need to be punished." The hoarse laughter of the 4 men barely rose above the inconceivable noise of the club, and yet Montgomery could seem to focus on nothing else. "Clean that up, why don't you?" said one of the men, followed by a string of curses. "Why the hell do we pay for this when there ain't even any blood?" "I can bleed," Montgomery's voice box assured them. "Hit me hard, really hard." "He's right," said another of the patrons. "They bleed so long as you don't got old lady fingers." His boot came thundering down onto Montgomery's jaw. The pain seemed to end his entire world, yet it continued on. A red-colored substance burst out of his body, much to the delight of the brutish patrons. "I'm yours," said Montgomery, blood flaring out of his mouth and nose. "Beat me like the Westy prick I am." "So we can break it, right?" "Yeah, these things are made to break." "It's true, they recycle everything." "Wow, you hear that, Westy? You're gonna be recycled." He could hardly see anymore, but he was dimly aware, amid his throbbing, pulsing, paralyzing pain, that he had been pulled up and slammed onto the table face down. His legs hung over the edge. Which way do these bend? Montgomery couldn't scream as his left leg cracked down the wrong direction, sending splitting agony through him. He quivered and trembled. Whoop, not that way. Well, now we better make a match. The right leg exploded. No scream could come. Yes, 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 he said. Shut up, swore one of the men. Why's it gotta talk like such a suck-up? Which setting would you prefer? I want to hear what this sad sack's actually thinking. Please don't, said Montgomery's voice box immediately, switching moods on the dime to match his exact thoughts. Oh, God, oh, please stop. Hate, rage, hell, how he hated these men, how he wished he were soul-caged as a battle bot right now, equipped with an automatic weapon. By the time the four were done with him, bored and ready to move on to admiring the dancers, Montgomery's body was split into 100 pieces. His mind, or what was left of it, was in the same state. He felt his consciousness leave the cracked and crunched remains of the corpse as two other Westy androids came and cleaned him up. He woke up again in another body much like the first, this one unspoiled and ready for abuse. Hours went by much like the first, only far worse. A creeping cold of pain became familiar to Montgomery. It arrived with the coming of night, without warning and without mercy. Vivid imaginations of Willow aged and withered until he could barely picture her any longer. Lying on his little cot, his body became tight, constricted. Agony, vitality, just draining agony. In his mind's eye, each moment of that date with Willow cast itself in golden light, and he would curse himself for each opportunity lost to touch her and know she was there, to feel the softness of her hands, to wrap his arms around her and know that things were okay, to look into her beautiful eyes, to even be near her face, just to bask in its glow, and know someone cared about him. He was starving for the touch of a human being. He remembered at some point in his life having read about the human need for physical touch, or for a basic level of intimacy, for closeness of the physical and other natures. It was a true need, if not a strictly physiological one, then certainly psychological. Oh, Montgomery ached so deeply. He wanted so deeply. The copper sphere shrunk upon him and told him he'd never touch a real human being again, never feel their breath on his skin, never so much as secure the warmth of an authentic platonic embrace, never feel like he was whole, like he was one with someone, and not alone and hated. As if from a bundle of cords in his head, echoes of the torture and its intense, horrid exacerbation of his sexual drive would run through him in devastating, agonizing shockwaves. The torture still ruled him. The thoughts could be dismissed, but the feelings, the desire could not. The desire to wrap his arms around a female, to press his body to hers and meet her lips 1,000 times. The heat, the moisture, the togetherness. Against the creeping, quivering shivers and the constricting agony, he thought that just one short time of love would quell the desire. He pounded his fists on the mattress, scratched at it with his fingernails. He knew what he was feeling had little to do with love. Fulfilling the ravenous demand could not be done slowly and whimsically and romantically, but rather only hungrily and intensely, like devouring a feast after being starved for weeks on end, only capable of satisfying, not being enjoyed. Ironically, such a desire for love only consumed itself. He couldn't sleep. He hurt much too badly, whether from the shivers of loneliness in this darkened cage, or from the guilt of his desires projecting automatically onto Willow, the female he cared most about at the moment, and thereby making a vending machine out of a woman he hardly knew and wanted rather to respect, to love, not merely use. Love and respect, he thought, as unthinkably obscene images from the club came flashing into his mind. His red face and his cold hands trembled. What respect is left anywhere? What propriety, what truth is there that can straighten this cockeyed world? The idea of wholeness was a lie. Even he and his relationship with Willow was a lie. There was no truth at all. No love. No real love. It was all fake, no matter how badly he wanted it not to be. No love, no trust, only needs and wants, like animals fulfilling instinct. Yet he could never fulfill that either in here. He would go mad. He clawed instinctively at the back of his head. His powerlessness consumed him above all else, like never-ending water torture. A spherical cage just upwards of 15 meager feet around. He could feel guilt over the excess and effect of his natural desires, all he wanted, or he could blame the torture past or present for what he now felt. But the desire still raged within him, unbidden, no matter what he did. What he chose to do was entirely irrelevant to anything. He was ruled by a cord, cords in his damn head, like a leash on a collar. Dear God, he pled. He curled into a ball and could only shiver and weep directly into his filthy mattress. Let it end. Give me release. Give me someone. Give me Willow. Anyone, damn it. Give me anyone. Please. Give me somebody. Dear God. But he wasn't sure anyone heard him. If there was a God, he couldn't hear Montgomery through the metal sphere. The only God was the Soulcage and its accompanying cell, walls unbreakable and 100,000 feet thick. And every day it demanded sacrifice. Geo9, remove your clothes and push them through the slot. Laundry day. After a few hours on the dirty, muddy, and bloody battlefield, dying more than once, Montgomery felt no desire to complain about being forced to disrobe. He stripped off the greenish-gray jumpsuit and his undergarments and felt cool air on his sweat-drenched bare skin. As he approached the door, the slot flipped open. He pushed the sloppily folded garments through, looking into the slot but only catching a sliver of what lay beyond. A cart bearing a large basket had been wheeled here by a guard for the dirty clothing. The guard pushed a new set of clothes through the slot and pulled the cart away. Montgomery let them fall to the floor, staring at them emptily. "Geo9," barked the intercom. "Put on the clean clothes." He breathed a long sigh as he bent down and gathered them up. In everything he did, they seemed to be growing increasingly impatient lately. Once he was garbed again, barely affected now by the pleasant feeling of fresh, clean clothes on one's body, he heard the door squeak. Instinctively, he jumped back. He'd almost forgotten the door could open. Of course it opens, it's a door. But who in the world would be coming through? The only other time this had happened, he'd been drenched in water and then beaten and taken away to be tortured. But he didn't think that likely, as he hadn't outright refused any of their requests lately. He'd only been mildly resistant to their warnings about upcoming Soulcage hibernation. Likely or not, great fear exploded in his heart, and he felt a need to assume submissiveness so that they wouldn't harm him. "Don't take me to that place again," he wanted to plead. His back hit against the Soulcage, and he stood paralyzed as a man walked in and heaved a cough. His suit was decorated in gray, slick and well-tailored. On his head sat an officer's cap embroidered with the designs and insignias of Greater Europa. His face wore a 5 o'clock shadow and a thin mustache. The skin was wrinkled and sallow, and his eyes carried deep purple bags underneath them. Brutish hands peeked out from the thick sleeves of the coat, and he brought with him a foul smell. He heaved another cough, and then steadied himself and cleared his throat. His gaze took to Montgomery's, but it didn't seem to search him very deeply. The man was just attentive enough to ensure Geo9 was cooperating. "I won't come too close," said the man, his voice weak and deathly. Montgomery clung to the Soulcage behind him. It felt utterly bizarre to have someone else in here with him, someone who, apparently, only wanted to talk to him. Montgomery said nothing. "My name is Keller, Officer Keller, but I don't much care what you call me." Another cough, and then another, and he cleared his throat violently before standing up straight, blinking repeatedly and shaking the skin of his face in the process. The door remained open behind him. Beyond was light and warmth and open spaces, all guarded by men with guns. If he ran, they wouldn't use them, though. They'd merely chase Montgomery down until they caught him and could beat him into submission non-lethally. He was too valuable to waste. "I understand you've been here for a while." Keller's eyes were glossy and his stance less than solid. "I heard that they want to put you in one of those soul cages, comatose. Is that correct?" Keller leaned an arm against the wall, nearly tripping from the slight roundness of the cell floor, and waited for a response. Montgomery wondered how he must look to this man. Surely even as sick as Keller was, Montgomery must have looked more pallid, more sickly, like a caged animal. "Why are you here?" he said slowly, little breath to the voice. It was all he could think to say. He didn't want to risk being rude by not speaking. Keller blew out a sigh like a horse. "I heard a few more things. I heard you were very cooperative in an intimate human setting recently as a soul-caged android." With some reluctance, Montgomery nodded. "What's your name?" Keller asked. "As I said," another cough came. "I won't shake your hand." "Montgomery," he said timidly, as if afraid the answer to that or any other question would earn him a beating. "Montgomery Noa. I'll cut this short, since I'm feeling horrendous, and I'm sure you have better things to do than listen to me cough." Not really, thought Montgomery. "I'm expected tonight at a military gala. Dreadful things, these parties they make us go to. They try to get us to maintain good relationships with the high classes of... Well, I shouldn't say more. The crux of the matter is that I'm sick. I feel like I should be carried out of here on a stretcher." "Me too," thought Montgomery. "I'm willing to offer you a deal." Keller's eyes blinked hard, multiple times, and he rubbed his temple so vigorously and with such a grimace that Montgomery could almost feel the man's headache from a distance. "I can't afford to miss this party tonight, so I want you to go in my place." Montgomery's jaw dropped. He leaned ever so slightly forward, not touching the Soulcage console any longer. "What?" "I know, you would think we'd have dozens of quality servants around here able to use soul cages in that capacity. Why would I come to a prisoner? Well, the truth is, Montgomery, you're rather exceptional. You fit into the soul cage so well that, from the footage I've watched, it's virtually indistinguishable from the real thing, at least when you're in a real-looking dummy." Montgomery couldn't decide if that was a compliment. Whatever it was, it went through him like a gust of wind, rippling the freshly clean clothes on his haggard, hideous body. "Well, I'm no dummy, but I am real-looking," said Keller. "I've got a chip in my head for this sort of thing." Chip in my head. That resonated with Montgomery. He remembered how that was used all the time in certain occupations. If you went missing, someone with exclusive and extremely confidential encrypted access to your soul cage microchip could access you through a soul cage halfway across the continent and be able to pop into your body, pushing your consciousness down into the depths of your mind unless you had a built-up mental resistance to that sort of thing. They did it for infamous criminals often, performing brain surgery to implant the microchip in their head so deep that removing it would be no small task. Montgomery didn't know any army officers of Greater Europa had the same thing done to them, but it made sense. And now this man, this Keller, wanted him to take over his body for him. "I want you to soul cage as me for this evening. It won't do my body any good. I won't get the physical rest I need, but mentally I'll be able to rest all the while. I've done it before once. I'm quite good at taking mental naps while someone else does the work for me." How can you trust me?" Montgomery couldn't help but wonder. "I might be unhinged, might slit your throat at the gala with a steak knife." Keller coughed and then laughed. "Well, I suppose you could. At this point I'd almost welcome it, but no, rest assured that the same consequences you've been threatened with for other forms of dissent will apply here. Besides, I'm offering you a reward that is conditional upon not killing me. My handlers will be escorting you the entire way. You'll have an earpiece in my ear to let my men contact you with everything you'll need to at least get by for the evening." "I don't understand the risk," Montgomery said with a shrug. "Why not send me as a program droid instead?" Keller raised an eyebrow and squinted with pain. "Haven't you been listening? I need to be at this gala, not a robot I've put in my place. It's very important for my social standing that I don't miss this party. Surely you have parties in the West Dominance, perhaps when you blow up one of our cities." Montgomery shook his head and narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "All that effort just to save face? I'm surprised you know so little about military politics, Montgomery." "Will I feel your pain, the sickness and all that?" Montgomery asked, not sure he knew the answer. "Only to a small extent. We'll ensure your mind is dulled from pain by the soul cage. You won't feel at your best, but you won't feel half as awful as I do right now. Just don't cough on anyone. Anyway, I think you'll be willing to try it, because if you do this favor for me, along with any future ones I may request, I will keep you out of the permanent soul cages. You won't have to be comatose. You would like that, wouldn't you?" Montgomery licked his lips. They felt dry, but he didn't notice. He stared hard at Keller and kept his breath frozen in his throat. "You could keep me out of it?" he finally managed. Keller nodded. "Yes. Frankly, I'd like for you to soul cage into my body for the duration of this sickness, but my handlers think that would be a bad idea. And damned if they aren't right. In a few hours you'll climb into that console and find yourself in my body, on your way to the gala. And I have faith you'll do well. What do you say, Monty?" He couldn't believe what he heard. To be free from that hell was all he wanted. At least all that he could feasibly hope to want. Being together with Willow, that isn't feasible. He was starting to accept that he'd never see her again. Yes, I'll do it. He forgot for a moment that he hated this man and everyone like him. Keller breathed a heavy sigh of relief. He smiled professionally, the light from outside beaming upon his back. "Go ahead and get some rest," he said. "You must be tired, so I'll make sure you don't use the soul cage until tonight. You'll need your energy." He turned and walked out, and the door shut behind him. Montgomery wasn't sure whether to feel hope, amusement, or uncertainty. To be a socialite for an evening. This was no answer to his prayer, he thought bitterly, but it was something. Something. All right, that's the end of Chapter 5 of Soulcage.